Let me start by saying I'm a fan of both fighters. With Canelo and Crawford pretty much, just around the corner with less than 2 weeks to go, I think that a lot of opinions are starting to, kind of be finalized. I think we've seen a lot of banter online, but people are finally starting to settle down on who they're going to pick and, the rationale for why they're making those picks. And as I previously mentioned, I'm a fan of both fighters. Like, just to be clear, I think the whole point of this channel was to give unbiased perspective and to have conversations, in the comments that don't necessarily have to lean towards race or anything like that, but can primarily focus on, the boxer's skills, their resumes, their IQ, and things like that. So this fight, as we've approached it, and if you guys have been following the channel for a while, you know how I felt about it. At first, I believed this fight wouldn't really be close, and yes, it's because size plays a huge factor. But not only is size playing a huge factor in this case, it's also like, Crawford's not moving up to fight a John Ruiz. Like, Crawford's moving up to find the best 168 pounder, arguably of all time. And so when, you look at the task to say that Crawford is moving up just to fight someone that's big, I think in a way is almost taking away from the credit that Crawford, rightfully deserves by jumping in. Now, some people want to look at this as like a cash grab, and I really don't think that's what this is. Like, Crawford is definitely one of those people that, at least to me, I mean, I don't personally know him or anything like that, but everything I've gathered from videos I've seen online, interviews, and just, people talking about him, he's a very competitive guy that loves to prove people wrong. And to be fair, he's a freak athlete. Like, the guy is much stronger than he appears to be. He obviously can get away with some of the technical, flaws that he has because he's such an athlete. But in this case, like, Canelo is a fighter who isn't just like pure brawn. I don't know where the narrative came that Canelo's like this big, like, huge power puncher and that's all he does. More than anything, he's like, he's a counterpuncher. Yes, he leads on his front foot, that Eddie Reynoso style that's become pretty much like synonymous with his with Canelo's current like fighting like style. But skill is also something that Crawford's going to have to worry about, and it's something that no one seems to consider. As if Canelo hasn't been at this stage before, this is just a regular day in the office for him. As where with Crawford, and yes, I know that Crawford stands up, he rises to the occasion pretty much every single time whenever he's in doubt. My favorite, Terence Crawford moment was the Sean Porter fight when, he thinks he's fine and the corner says he's down and he just turns it up another gear. So let's not get it confused with me thinking that Crawford isn't, an exceptional talent and potentially an all-time great fighter. It's just that I think that the blatant disrespect and like slander for Canelo is just crazy. Right after the Madrimov fight, everyone was kind of on the same boat. Like, yeah, if Crawford had this tough of a fight, and I think Crawford won. Let's not start the whole like robbery conversation, because that definitely wasn't the case. Like, Crawford won that. But it was a lot more competitive than what most people assumed. Like, Madrimov was a major underdog. And the fact that the fight not only went the distance after Crawford had stopped so many opponents, but also Crawford showed, flaws in his defense that have always kind of been there. It's just that at 154 with the added weight, he kind of got caught a little bit more than he usually does. And while, yes, this is boxing, people will get punched, punches will land. With Crawford, I feel like at least once in almost every fight, someone is able to land something significant. And not to Crawford's fault, but this really is the first time he's stepping up to this level. Like, the Errol Spence fight was definitely like, as the Brits would say, it was like a domestic dust-up, right? But with this particular fight, you have two countries essentially colliding. Now, I know that the American fan base, have been watching Canelo, and he's practically the face of boxing in the American market as well. For those of you that say Tank Davis, I can't help you there. I understand like his popularity, but it's nowhere near the level of Canelo if you're looking at it from an unbiased perspective. And I think that this amount of media attention, this amount of, the size of stage, it's going to play a big factor because, it typically always does. He's either going to rise to the occasion and kind of, prove, the generational talent that he is. But I personally believe he's most likely going to fall a little short. Not terribly short. Like, Crawford's going to do well in spots. But, the more this fight goes on, a lot of people are saying that Canelo's stamina is going to play a huge issue. Yet, I've seen Canelo take his foot off the gas in these fights, kind of coast through. But for the first time in a while, it does feel like Canelo is, kind of like invigorated to want to, not just punish his opponent, but prove a point. I think that it's almost disrespectful to ignore all of the history, of how we got here, the fact that Canelo has been dropping every single 168 pounder, and the criticism that he gets is that he should be putting these guys away. Yet, when other fighters, drop a guy but don't necessarily put him away, they're just seen as skillful boxers. But for some reason, Canelo's flat-footed, and he is. Don't get me wrong. He's relatively slow on his feet. But when Canelo does it, he's flat-footed. He's his feet are stuck in sand. What's it called? His reflexes are gone. He can no longer perform, at the same level that he once used to. And I'm not expecting him to. Let's be clear. I'm not expecting a Triple G2. I'm not necessarily expecting the defense of a Daniel Jacobs fight. But there is going to be little hints of it, I think, sprinkled. I think Canelo's going to come in lighter. Honestly, I want to say he's going to come around the 165, 166 mark. If you guys have been paying attention to this, Canelo hasn't been really hitting that 168 pound limit for the last few fights. I think he's been trying to keep up his agility because he is aware that, in boxing, a few milliseconds make a huge difference in that reaction time, and agility really do play a huge factor when it comes to timing and things like that. So, my point with all this conversation is, I think that as we've gotten closer to the fight and people have started to make their picks, and so many people are picking Crawford, which is honestly, good for him, right? I don't want to say it's shocking because the respect is well deserved, but I think that the rationale just does not make sense. People are assuming that Crawford is going to maintain his speed, maintain his power, maintain his agility, his counterpunching skills, his strength. They're assuming we're just going to get the Crawford that dominated at 147 and that we're just going to drop him into 168 with absolutely no factors changing in the fight. That's not going to be the case. Every single fighter has looked different when they've jumped across weight divisions. Something has changed. It doesn't always have to be for the worst. I'm not saying that Crawford's going to be less strong. He could be stronger, with the added muscle, less cutting and things like that. But to say that, all these factors aren't going to play a role and that he's just going to be able to dominate in a way that, he's been dominating all the rest of his competition, I just think that does not make sense. The rationale behind it does not make sense. And let's not even get started with the whole the boots sparring session and things like that. People were so upset that Canelo got that look, and I saw a lot of rumors about Canelo getting stopped in 3 rounds and having to stop, sparring or whatever. But it's where does this information come from? At what point did it become cool and acceptable to try to, take away from a fight, or to try to take away from a fighter to big up another one? It's just the weirdest fucking fangirl energy, in my opinion. But let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say that Boots did go in and, and make Canelo stop, wanting to spar after 3 rounds. He's still giving him a look. Bomac and team saying, Boots isn't Crawford, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, we know he's not Crawford, but he's giving Canelo a look. In the same way Lester Martinez is not Canelo, but he's giving Crawford a look. In the same way that, Steve Nelson isn't Canelo, but he's giving Crawford a look. Like, Bomac and team are smart enough to know that this level of sparring is only going to give Canelo the ability to see a fighter whose pressure, whose youth, agility, and honestly, in a similar way as Crawford, natural athleticism and freakish like athleticism, it's going to give Canelo that look. And while a lot of people, it's obvious Canelo has the better resume, but while a lot of people will refer to like, oh, Canelo has fought Lara, he fought, Mayweather, etc. That was so long ago. Like, take that kind of an argument and put it into like your life and like your, your abilities. Like, I'm in my 30s. To say that I did this in my 20s and now I'll be able to do it in my 30s, like with certain different like things, like it just, yeah, I know how to do it, but my instincts no longer are keeping up with, what I now know, with the information that I know. And so to bring up like resumes from, over a decade ago, I think that's also not necessarily doing like either fighter a favor. Like, yes, Crawford got rocked by Gamboa. That doesn't necessarily mean Canelo's gonna rock him either. Yes, like Canelo got outboxed by Mayweather. That doesn't necessarily mean he's gonna get outboxed by Crawford. Like, up until like the Dimitri Bivol fight, which is a lot more recent than people think, like it's really not that long ago, we all thought Canelo was unstoppable. Now, I say we, like the broader boxing audience. Like, obviously, when they were talking about him going up to fight Usyk, like that shit was just ridiculous beyond, like, anybody with a fucking boxing brain could have been like, yeah, no, don't do that. He will outwork you, drop you, stop you, all that shit. Like, I'm not even sure if Beterbiev is a good fight. Imagine going up another 2 weight divisions, right? 3 if you want to count like the Bridger weight division or whatever. But my point is, I think that, I could appreciate people wanting Crawford to win. Like, it'll be so great for his legacy, and we all know the history behind, Terence Crawford and Top Rank, his terrible position when it came to, the marketplace. Like, he wasn't able to fight his contemporaries and his peers. And so, we all saw how special he could be, but didn't necessarily get to witness it until the Errol Spence fight. And I think that fight, that camp, got Terence Crawford. That was the camp that, consumed Terence Crawford. I know that the Canelo task is a bigger one than Spence, but I don't think Crawford has the same personal, like, vendetta going for him that's fueling him as he did with the Spence Jr. fight. Like, I don't think he's going to perform to that level, nor would I expect him to. One, it's like a different opponent, obviously. Like, Spence isn't a Canelo or anything like that. But what I'm trying to say is that Crawford had his moment in the same way that Canelo had his moment. Like, when Canelo stepped up to Triple G, that was his, that was his rival. And there are a few fighters that can have, multiple rivals, but it's never really... there's always that one fighter in a boxer's career that really stands out. I'll give you a few examples. For Pacquiao, a lot of people like to say it was Mayweather. It really wasn't. We all know Pacquiao's like true rival was Marquez. Like, no matter how you split it, like, that was the fighter that really, had Pacquiao thinking about all the different, possibilities and outcomes and things like that. For, Terence Crawford, obviously it was Spence Jr. For Canelo, it was Triple G. Like, that was the fighter, and a lot of people are trying to say that, Canelo should fight Benavidez and things like that, and I think he should too. But that rivalry is almost forced in a way. It's like the next guy up, it conforms with like the history of boxing, but it's not necessarily something that, that was natural, I guess you could say. And I think with Crawford, if you guys are watching like the interviews, he almost has to, like, it sounds to me like he's low-key forcing himself not to get up, because Crawford is a disciplined athlete, but there's like this forced drama, right? This forced narrative that everyone says I'm too small, no one thinks I can do this, which obviously isn't the case, because the odds are very reflective that, you know, most industry experts are giving Crawford a chance. So, you know, while it took us a very long time to get here to give Crawford his respect, I hate the fact that it took this level of an opponent and this type of a risk to finally have Crawford, you know, get the credit that he deserves. Because I would hate to see it, you know, I'd hate to see Crawford get flatlined, and I think there's a very high possibility of that. Like, trust me, he fights in a style nowhere near the survival that Jermell Charlo pulled off. Canelo's not going to take it easy on him like he did Munguia. Berlanga, I think Canelo genuinely did try to stop, but the size was just too much of a factor. Like, I think Canelo has learned how to deal with elusiveness. He's dealt with a lot more elusive fighters than he has like pressure fighters. And if you go back and look at some of his more recent fights, like, he's willing and open to take on competition that don't necessarily benefit his style. And so I think that with Canelo, with the high possibility of there being a stoppage, even though I think that it's most likely going to be a unanimous decision, Crawford unfortunately, you know, had to get to this point in order to be validated. And I hope that, you know, win or lose, Crawford, you know, everyone should give him all the praise, because this is a task that, you know, no one asked him to do, and that a lot of people weren't even calling for. Like, it's a fantasy fight. Like, let's not kid ourselves, it's a fantasy fight. But if he wins this, we need to give him full credit. More importantly, and I'm not really one for giving like participation trophies or anything like that, but if Crawford goes in, gets stopped, you know, we all know it's because he tried. He didn't go in there to fold. He genuinely put his best foot forward. Crawford's not one of those that does things for money. Like, obviously, you know, everyone knows how like financially savvy that guy is. And so I think he deserves credit for trying. You know, if he goes in there and actually tries to put his best foot forward, which I fully expect. If he goes in and puts up a competitive fight, he should still get credit, because while this is an aging Canelo, so many factors are against Crawford in this fight. The size, you know, the weight, the age factor, you know, there's just so many things to consider. And I'm really looking forward to the fight in like less than 2 weeks, and I'd really like to hear what you guys think. You know, if we can keep the comments and the feedback a little bit more unbiased and give true rationale for why we're picking who we're picking, I think that that'll be, you know, overall just better for the dialogue. You know, if you guys want to talk all that racial shit and things like that, please just go to other channels. Like, there's really, you know, there's no need for it. At the end of the day, it's never that serious. Like, I understand that this is like a black, like, American versus like a Mexican fight, and that always produces some of like the more like, you know, racially charged arguments, but, you know, let's just keep it boxing. So thank you all again for tuning in. Until next time, you know, peace.